Study notes on historical legal context, from colonial conquest to democracy. 2. Historical legal context, from colonial conquest to democracy. The history of South Africa's governance has transitioned from centuries of colonial domination to the establishment of a democratic state. This journey is fundamentally layered, intertwined with various socio-political dynamics shaped by colonial conquests, the emergence of race-based governance, and the struggle for democracy. 2.1 Pre-Union developments. The pre-Union phase, before 1910, was characterized by various indigenous governance structures and the imposition of colonial systems. Indigenous governance. Before European colonization, indigenous populations operated complex governance systems through chiefdoms. Leadership structures included chiefs and headmen who exercised localized authority and customary law, responding to community needs. Such systems, although often viewed through a patriarchal lens, function within a communal framework where leaders were expected to act for the well-being of their followers. Colonial impositions. The British established colonies, Cape and Natal, that echoed the Westminster parliamentary model, with legislative supremacy highly centralized. Local legislatures had limited autonomy, as the British Governor-General retained veto powers. This stunted the development of a truly representative political framework. The Boer republics, inspired by European constitutions like the U.S. Constitution, introduced forms of governance featuring greater separation of powers but still maintained racial exclusions within their Bill of Rights. Racialization of governance. Racial stratifications were codified as colonial authorities began constructing legal systems favoring white settlers. For instance, the Glenn Gray Act reinforced racial segregation and limited the political representation of the African majority. The governance model evolved to feature a bifurcated state wherein indigenous Africans were governed through chiefs under colonial oversight, laying the groundwork for future racial divisions. 2.2 The Union of South Africa and the bifurcated state. The establishment of the Union of South Africa in 1910 marked a significant turning point, creating a unified, albeit racially divided, state structure. Creation of the Union. The Union was formed through the South Africa Act of 1909, integrating the colonies while excluding African participation in governance. White men were provided with parliamentary representation, laying a foundation for continued racial oppression. The political landscape remained characterized by paternalism, where the colonial government governed the black population through appointed chiefs, thus administering indirect rule. Parliamentary supremacy. A Westminster-style parliamentary system was adopted, significant for its absolute legislative power over aspects of society but selective in its enfranchisement. The foundational constitution retained provisions to restrict black voting rights. Over time, such limited representation for black citizens was systematically dismantled, notably through legislation that removed previously limited political rights. The bifurcated nature of governance. The legal framework developed a bifurcation that saw a democratically styled parliamentary system for whites, while imposing autocratic rule over the majority. This system bolstered racial inequality and ignited systemic discord, effectively disenfranchising non-white populations. Subsequent legal developments. The rise of the National Party in 1948 ushered in apartheid, solidifying the bifurcation through severe legal restrictions and institutionalized racism. The resultant laws and overall governance structure revealed the stark dichotomy that characterized South African legal history and echoed through the transition toward a democratic constitution. Conclusion. The pre-Union developments and the formation of the Union of South Africa set the stage for deeply entrenched racial inequalities that reverberated through the country's apartheid history and into the eventual struggle for democracy. This historical legal context is critical for understanding the complexities involved in forming a new constitutional order that aims to rectify centuries of systemic injustice and promote a more egalitarian, democratic society. The evolution from colonial dominance to a constitutional democracy illustrates the continuing impact of this turbulent legacy on South Africa's current political and legal landscape. Study notes on the transition to democracy in South Africa. 3.1 The run-up to the first democratic election. Before the first democratic elections held in April 1994, South Africa underwent a significant period of transformation. Various movements emerged to resist apartheid, notably the African National Congress, ANC, the South African Communist Party, SACP, and the United Democratic Front, UDF. The Freedom Charter, adopted in 1955, the Freedom Charter articulated the aspirations of the oppressed in South Africa, calling for equal rights and democracy for all citizens. It laid the groundwork for a human rights culture that later influenced the 1996 Constitution. Constitutional Guidelines. In 1988, the ANC's Constitutional Guidelines for a Democratic South Africa emphasized the necessity of a Bill of Rights centered on human rights and legal enforcement, showing a progressive shift towards more democratic ideals. International pressure and negotiation initiation. By the late 1980s, mounting internal resistance and international sanctions pressured the apartheid government. In February 1990, President F.W. de Klerk lifted political bans on liberation movements and released Nelson Mandela from prison. These actions signaled the beginning of formal negotiations towards ending apartheid. Negotiation dynamics. The ANC issued a discussion document outlining principles for a non-racial democratic state, emphasizing the need for a judicially enforceable Bill of Rights and an independent judiciary, addressing the need for a new constitutional framework following decades of oppression. 3.2 CODESA, the MPNF, and the two-stage transition. The Congress for a Democratic South Africa, CODESA, convened in late 1991, was pivotal in negotiating a transition to democracy. Formation of CODESA. CODESA included major political entities and aimed at drafting an interim constitution. It emerged from the realization that neither the ANC nor the National Party, NP, could achieve absolute dominance, prompting a compromise through negotiation. Challenges and reformation. Initial negotiations included a declaration of intent that outlined a vision for a united, non-racial, and democratic state, emphasizing human rights and a supreme constitution. However, tensions arose, leading to the ANC suspending participation in mid-1992 due to slow progress, which resulted in the transition to the multi-party negotiating process, MPNP. Interim government structure. The MPNP structured a two-stage approach for transitioning to full democracy. The first stage produced an interim constitution adopted by the unelected MPNP and established a coalition government, featuring power sharing between the ANC and NP for 5 years. The second stage involved drafting a final constitution by a democratically elected constitutional assembly post the first democratic elections. 3.3 Drafting and adoption of the final 1996 constitution. The final phase of South Africa's transition culminated in the drafting and adoption of the 1996 Constitution, a significant milestone for the new democracy. 1994 democratic elections. The ANC won a majority in the first democratic elections, but did not secure the two-thirds needed to unilaterally draft the Constitution. The ANC engaged in negotiations with other parties, particularly the NP, to promote consensus. Public participation and legislative challenges. The Constitutional Assembly initiated a public participation program to actively involve citizens in the constitutional dialogue. However, criticisms arose regarding the effectiveness of this process, with some arguing it often led to vague demands without formal impact. Constitutional certification. Following its adoption, the final constitution was submitted to the Constitutional Court for certification in line with the 34 constitutional principles. The court ruled on various grounds deemed incompatible and requested revisions, leading to an amended constitution certified in December 1996. Constitution characteristics. The 1996 Constitution established a democratic state founded on human dignity, equality, and non-racialism, embodying transformative constitutionalism. It includes an expansive Bill of Rights emphasizing both civil and socio-economic rights, and it charges the judiciary, especially the Constitutional Court, with enforcing these provisions. Conclusion. South Africa's path to democracy was marked by organized resistance, strategic negotiations, and a commitment to establishing a rights-based constitutional democracy. The transition involved multiple stages, each with its challenges and resolutions, culminating in the adoption of a transformative constitution that aimed to rectify past injustices and foster a more equitable society. Understanding the nuances of this process is essential for grasping not just the legal framework of contemporary South Africa but also the socio-political landscape it continues to evolve within. Study notes on the South African Constitution of 1996. 4.1 The transformative nature of the Constitution. The South African Constitution of 1996 is celebrated for its transformative nature, designed to reshape the country's socio-political landscape in the aftermath of apartheid. Fundamental values. It emphasizes human dignity, equality, non-racialism, and non-sexism as its cornerstone ideals. The Constitution seeks to establish a democratic state that rectifies past injustices and promotes social justice. Constitutional sovereignty. Unlike previous frameworks that exhibited parliamentary supremacy, the 1996 Constitution signifies a shift to constitutional supremacy, meaning any laws inconsistent with its provisions are rendered invalid. Comprehensive Bill of Rights. The Constitution includes an extensive Bill of Rights protecting civil, political, social, and economic rights, making the protection of such rights a duty of the state. This bill imposes both negative and positive obligations on the government, necessitating proactive measures to foster social and economic welfare. Judicial independence. The establishment of the Constitutional Court asserts the role of judiciary as a guardian of constitutional rights, vested with the power to declare legislation unconstitutional. This safeguards against any governmental action that could undermine citizens' rights. Transformative goals. Beyond mere legal structures, the Constitution aspires to create a more egalitarian society by addressing inequalities rooted in the past, moving towards a society characterized by inclusiveness, accountability, and justice. 4.2 Interpretation of the South African Constitution. The interpretation of the South African Constitution is crucial for its application and effectiveness. Dynamic interpretation. Judges are aware that the Constitution is a living document that requires interpretation in light of evolving social, political, and economic contexts. As such, its provisions often contain open-ended language requiring judicial clarification. Holistic approach. Courts are encouraged to interpret the Constitution holistically, considering the broader historical and socio-political context. This facilitates a more profound understanding and application of constitutional values. Use of precedent and external sources. The Constitutional Court frequently relies on previous judgments, international law, and comparative analyses to inform its rulings. The judges also recognize the importance of societal conditions and historical injustices when interpreting constitutional norms. Grand narrative. The court utilizes South Africa's history as a grand narrative to contextualize legal provisions, reinforcing the intent behind the Constitution's creation and ensuring its interpretation resonates with the goals of post-apartheid justice. Contextual factors. Overall, the Constitutional Court aims to align its interpretations with the transformative aspirations of the Constitution, recognizing that its goals extend beyond mere legal compliance to meaningful societal change. 4.3 Context. An inegalitarian society and a one-party dominant democracy. Understanding the socio-political context in which the South African Constitution operates is crucial to grasping its significance and challenges. Inequality issues. Despite the transformative aspirations of the Constitution, South Africa remains a highly unequal society, grappling with significant disparities in wealth, social injustice, and poverty. These realities challenge the Constitution's goals of human dignity and equality. One-party dominance. The African National Congress, ANC, has maintained substantial electoral dominance since the first democratic elections. However, its decreasing percentage of votes raises concerns about the implications of a dominant party system on democratic governance and accountability. Erosion of checks and balances. The dominance of a single party can undermine checks on executive power, potentially leading to governance that prioritizes party interests over constitutional principles. Such dynamics may hinder the legislature's ability to effectively oversee the executive. Criticism of governance. Critics argue that the success of transformative constitutionalism depends heavily on the political will of those in power. They point to issues such as bureaucratic inertia, corruption, and policy failures as key obstacles to realizing the Constitution's promises. Need for engagement and redress. There's a call for ongoing commitment to redress past injustices, with decolonization identified as a necessary goal to navigate the legacies of colonial and apartheid governance. Scholars emphasize the need for constitutional provisions that concretely address economic and social disparities. Conclusion. The South African Constitution of 1996 represents a pivotal shift towards democracy and human rights aimed at transforming a legacy of oppression. The interplay of transformative ideals, interpretative practices, and the realities of ongoing inequality and dominant party politics shapes its application and effectiveness in fostering a truly democratic society. Understanding this constitutional landscape is key for both scholars and practitioners engaged in legal and political reform in South Africa. Study notes on constitutionalism. 2.1 Introduction. The chapter begins with a necessary exploration of foundational concepts vital for comprehending South Africa's constitutional law. as delineated in the 1996 Constitution. It discusses the historical context of the Constitution and introduces essential doctrines and principles that shape its functioning, notably focusing on the evolution of constitutionalism in South Africa post-apartheid while acknowledging influences from colonial and apartheid periods. 2.2 Constitutionalism. This section examines the essence of constitutionalism, particularly as it relates to governance and law. 2.2.1 Understanding the nature of constitutionalism. Constitutionalism can be defined as a government bound by a constitution that limits its powers and defines the authority of various institutions. It seeks to balance the need for effective governance with the necessity of preventing the abuse of power through checks and balances. Key characteristics include identification of governance institutions, legislature, executive, judiciary. Legal frameworks for power distribution and procedural adherence. Relationship definitions between governance institutions and the governed. Rule enactment to regulate political communities while authorizing and limiting state power. 2.2.2 Constitutionalism understood descriptively. Descriptive constitutionalism provides a factual account of governance institutions without delving into normative evaluations or values. Historically, this descriptive lens was observed in South Africa pre-democracy, where constitutions existed but failed to uphold fundamental rights and representation. 2.2.3 Constitutionalism understood prescriptively. The prescriptive view of constitutionalism integrates norms, including the separation of powers, rule of law, human rights protection, and democratic governance. This evolved notion emphasizes the ethical underpinnings and aspirational nature of constitutions, moving beyond mere structural description. 2.2.4 Constitutionalism in South Africa. 2.2.4.1 Introduction. Reflects on the layered history of constitutionalism in South Africa, including the impact of colonial governance and indigenous traditions, influencing the present constitutional framework. 2.2.4.2 The era of the dominance of the Westminster constitutional model. The 1910 Union Constitution mirrored the British Westminster system, lacking a Bill of Rights and parliamentary limitations. This system has been critiqued for its role in entrenching racial inequalities during apartheid. 2.2.4.3 The era of constitutional supremacy. 2.2.4.3.1 Introduction. Lays the groundwork for understanding constitutional supremacy in the post-apartheid era. 2.2.4.3.2 Constitutional supremacy. Emphasizes the 1996 Constitution as the supreme law, binding all other laws and actions to its provisions. This establishes a system where any law inconsistent with the Constitution is deemed invalid. 2.2.4.3.3 A value-based constitutional system. Section 1 of the Constitution encapsulates fundamental values such as human dignity, non-racialism, and the rule of law, asserting these values as both foundations for governance and aspirations for the South African society. 2.2.4.3.4 Cooperative federalism. Highlights the quasi-federal structure of governance across local, provincial, and national spheres, mandating cooperation among them to fulfill constitutional objectives. This promotes interdependence rather than competition in service delivery. This study on the nature of constitutionalism in South Africa explores its evolution, characteristics, and implementation within the framework of the 1996 Constitution. The chapter underscores the importance of understanding both the descriptive and prescriptive aspects of constitutional law while reflecting on the rich historical context that shapes these legal principles today. Study notes on the separation of powers. 2.3 Separation of powers. This section critically examines the doctrine of separation of powers, which is foundational for democratic governance. It outlines its purpose, historical context, as well as its implications and existence in the South African constitutional framework. 2.3.1 The purpose and principles of the doctrine of separation of powers. The doctrine aims to ensure that governmental power is distributed across different branches, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. This distribution helps avoid the concentration of power and potential abuses. Key principles include Trias Politica, division of power among the three branches. Separation of functions, each branch has distinct responsibilities to ensure no overlap occurs that could lead to power misuse. Separation of personnel, different individuals should govern each branch to maintain independence. O. Checks and balances. Each branch can monitor and limit the powers of the others, ensuring accountability and responsiveness in governance. 2.3.2 A brief history of the doctrine of separation of powers. Originating during the Enlightenment, the doctrine sought to prevent government tyranny, moving away from absolute monarchy towards a balanced governmental structure. Influential theorists like John Locke and Montesquieu contributed to this model. Locke emphasized avoiding excessive power accumulation in one entity, while Montesquieu formalized the three-branch system: executive, legislative, judiciary. 2.3.3 Separation of powers, the South African experience. 2.3.3.1 Introduction. The South African Constitution incorporates the separation of powers, aiming for democracy and accountability. The drafters recognized the need for checks and balances to protect against power abuse. 2.3.3.2 The Legislature. Chapter 4 of the Constitution outlines Parliament's authority to legislate. However, members of the executive also serve as legislators, creating overlapping responsibilities and influencing dynamics. 2.3.3.3 The executive. The President, as head of the executive, coordinates government functions but must also answer to Parliament. The Constitution upholds a system where the executive is accountable to the legislature, although political loyalties can complicate this accountability. 2.3.3.4 The judiciary. The judiciary maintains complete independence from other branches. Chapter 8 establishes a hierarchical court system, with the Constitutional Court as the apex body responsible for upholding the Constitution and exercising judicial review, determining the constitutionality of laws or executive actions. 2.3.3.5 The counter-majoritarian dilemma. This dilemma highlights the tension between democratic principles and judicial power. Judicial review allows unelected judges to invalidate laws supported by the majority, which raises questions about the legitimacy of judicial authority compared to democratic preferences. Three responses to this dilemma include: viewing judicial review as limiting citizen participation, underscoring the court's role in promoting democracy, despite their unelected status, advocating for interpretive frameworks that align judicial review with democratic goals. These concepts serve as essential pillars in understanding the South African governance framework, particularly regarding how power is distributed and checked among state institutions, emphasizing the need for accountability, protection of rights, and democratic integrity. Study notes on the rule of law. 2.4 The rule of law. The concept of the rule of law is fundamental to the functioning of South Africa's constitutional democracy. It serves as a cornerstone for ensuring that all individuals and institutions, including the government, are subject to the law. This section breaks down the components and historical context of the rule of law within the South African legal framework. 2.4.1 Introduction. The rule of law is a foundational value enshrined in Section 1 of the 1996 Constitution of South Africa. It establishes the principle that the law applies equally to all individuals, thereby promoting justice, equality, and accountability. Legal scholars often debate its scope and implications, striving to determine how it operates both as a concept and a practical guideline for governance. 2.4.2 A brief history of the rule of law. The rule of law has its roots in the political philosophy articulated during the Enlightenment, particularly by legal theorist Tavi Dicey, who defined it by three main principles. 1. Public authority is derived from and must conform to law, preventing arbitrary governance. 2. Equality before the law ensures all individuals are treated uniformly under legal standards. 3. The necessity for ordinary courts to enforce laws that protect the rights of individuals, thus allowing for judicial oversight of legislation. Under apartheid, the South African governance system claimed to adhere to the rule of law but fundamentally failed to protect the rights of all citizens, especially the oppressed non-white majority. The apartheid regime promulgated laws that were discriminatory and maintained through legal means, but this represented a distortion of the true essence of the rule of law, effectively reducing it to a framework that enforced inequality. 2.4.3 The rule of law under the 1996 Constitution. The 1996 Constitution marks a crucial shift from the oppressive legal regime of apartheid to one grounded in respect for human rights and the rule of law. It establishes that every individual has the right to challenge the legality of government actions through courts. All laws are to be tested against the Constitution, and any law that contradicts its provisions is invalid. The Constitution provides mechanisms for judicial review, empowering courts to declare laws or actions inconsistent with constitutional values as unconstitutional. The judiciary is tasked with safeguarding rights and ensuring accountability, reinforcing the concept that no one is above the law. This judicial authority stems from the Constitution itself, ensuring that the law functions as a protector of citizens rather than as a tool for oppression. In addition to safeguards against arbitrary power, the rule of law also ensures that the legal system is transparent, accessible, and responsive to the needs of society. The introduction of justiciable rights and a commitment to an objective value system reflects a profound transformation aimed at preventing past injustices. Overall, the rule of law in South Africa is central to achieving justice, fairness, and democracy. It signifies a commitment to legal principles that govern all actions taken in public life, ensuring that each individual is protected under the same laws, and it plays an essential role in the nation's ongoing journey toward equity and human rights for all. Study notes on democracy. 2.5 Democracy. Democracy is a central tenet of governance that embodies principles of equality, participation, and representation. Understanding the various forms of democracy is crucial to grasping its implementation, especially within the context of South Africa's constitution. 2.5.1 Introduction. Democracy, as framed in the South African context, involves more than just a system of voting. It encompasses values, principles, and practices that ensure government accountability and citizen participation in political processes. The Constitution identifies democracy as a foundational value, critical for ensuring that government power is exercised in the public interest and is subject to the will of the people. 2.5.2 Conceptions of democracy. Various models of democracy exist, each with specific features and implications for governance. Direct democracy. Citizens have the direct power to make decisions and laws, often through referendums. This model emphasizes community involvement in legislative processes. Examples may include initiatives where citizens vote directly on specific policy decisions. Representative democracy. Citizens elect representatives to make decisions on their behalf. This form is prevalent in modern democracies, including South Africa, where the focus is on electing officials who will formulate and implement laws while being accountable to their constituents. Participatory democracy. Beyond elections, this model encourages ongoing engagement of citizens in political processes, decision-making, and community governance. It aims to empower citizens to influence policy and governance actively. Constitutional democracy. This form integrates the principles of democracy with constitutionalism, meaning that democracy operates within the framework of a constitution that protects individual rights and freedoms. South Africa's constitution embodies this, ensuring that democratic processes conform to the rule of law and respect for human dignity. 2.5.3 Direct democracy. In a direct democracy, citizens play an active role in decision-making, often through mechanisms such as propositions and referendums. While this form can enhance civic engagement, it also raises challenges in practical governance regarding informed decision-making and the representation of diverse views. 2.5.4 Representative democracy. This model involves selecting officials who make policy decisions on behalf of their constituents. In South Africa, the National Assembly and National Council of Provinces serve as key components, where members are elected to represent the varied interests of the population. The emphasis is placed on accountability, ensuring that representatives act in the interests of those who elected them. 2.5.5 Participatory democracy. Participatory democracy extends beyond periodic elections, advocating for continuous citizen involvement in governance. It encourages public dialogue, local governance initiatives, and public forums where diverse perspectives can be expressed and considered within governmental processes. 2.5.6 Constitutional democracy. This concept merges democratic governance with a framework that upholds constitutional values. The supremacy of the Constitution in South Africa ensures that all laws and government actions are consistent with democratic principles, establishing a system where rights are protected against the potential tyranny of the majority. Summary. Democracy in South Africa is multifaceted, integrating various forms of governance that empower citizens while maintaining accountability through constitutional safeguards. The interplay between these democratic ideals and the respect for the rule of law reinforces the legitimacy of governance within the framework of the 1996 Constitution. Understanding these concepts is fundamental to grasping the broader implications of democratic practice in South Africa. Notes on Constitutionalism. 2.2 Constitutionalism. 2.2.1 Understanding the nature of constitutionalism. Constitutionalism refers to a governing structure bound by a written constitution, emphasizing limited government and a commitment to democratic values. It mandates that government officials adhere to the Constitution, which serves as the legitimate source of authority. Key aspects include establishing governance institutions, delineating public power distribution, and ensuring accountability to prevent oppression. 2.2.2 Constitutionalism understood descriptively. Descriptive constitutionalism focuses on the factual framework of a state's governance, its institutions, their organization, and their powers, without engaging in a normative evaluation of justice or fairness. This formalistic view was typical prior to South Africa's transition to democracy, representing a hollow constitutionalism that lacked substantive rights for all citizens. 2.2.3 Constitutionalism understood prescriptively. Prescriptive constitutionalism views constitutions not just as structural documents but as frameworks that embody values and norms essential for governance. This newer interpretation emphasizes ideals such as the protection of human rights, the rule of law, and democratic governance, advocating a more comprehensive vision of justice within the political framework. 2.2.4 Constitutionalism in South Africa, a brief overview. 2.2.4.1 Introduction. South Africa's constitutional development is informed by its unique colonial history and the need for a societal transformation post-apartheid, recognizing both formal and substantive dimensions of constitutionalism. 2.2.4.2 The era of the dominance of the Westminster constitutional model. The 1910 Union Constitution established a Westminster-style governance model that emphasized parliamentary supremacy, lacking mechanisms for protecting fundamental rights. This model facilitated the political dominance of a minority and failed to uphold principles of equality and justice. 2.2.4.3 The era of constitutional supremacy. 2.2.4.3.1 Introduction. Post-apartheid, South Africa adopted a new constitution emphasizing supremacy, signifying a significant shift in the nature of governance and public authority. 2.2.4.3.2 Constitutional supremacy. The principle of constitutional supremacy asserts that the Constitution is the highest law, making any conflicting laws void. This foundational change enables judicial review, empowering courts to invalidate actions that do not conform to constitutional provisions. 2.2.4.3.3 A value-based constitutional system. Section 1 of the Constitution outlines core values such as human dignity, equality, non-racialism, and the rule of law, establishing a framework that goes beyond mere governance to reflect moral and ethical aspirations. 2.2.4.3.4 Cooperative federalism. The Constitution endorses a cooperative federalism model, necessitating collaboration among national, provincial, and local governments to realize constitutional objectives. This interdependence is vital for effective governance and service delivery, although it can present challenges if different political parties govern across these spheres. Overall, South African constitutionalism represents a transformation from past injustices towards a system aspiring to uphold democratic values and protect the rights of all citizens, grounded in a comprehensive understanding of constitutional governance. Notes on separation of powers. 2.3 Separation of powers. 2.3.1 Purpose and principles of the doctrine of separation of powers. The doctrine of separation of powers serves as a foundational principle in constitutional governance, aimed at preventing the concentration of government power within one branch. Its primary purpose is to distribute authority among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches to reduce the risk of abuse and preserve democratic values. This separation ensures each branch operates independently with distinct functions and responsibilities, enabling a system of checks and balances to maintain accountability and protect citizens' rights. Principles of separation of powers. 1. Trias politica, divides governmental power among the legislative, executive, and judiciary. 2. Separation of functions, each branch has specific responsibilities, preventing interference among them. 3. Separation of personnel, distinct officials are assigned to each branch, promoting independent operation. 4. Checks and balances, mechanisms are in place for each branch to hold the others accountable to prevent overreach. 2.3.2 A brief history of the doctrine of separation of powers. The concept originates from Enlightenment thinkers, particularly John Locke and Montesquieu. Locke expressed concerns about absolute power residing with the monarch or parliament, advocating for a distribution of governmental functions. Montesquieu formalized the theory, emphasizing the necessity of separating powers to safeguard liberty and avoid tyranny. The modern doctrine was crystallized in documents like the U.S. Constitution, which set a precedent for subsequent adaptations worldwide. 2.3.3 Separation of powers, the South African experience. 2.3.3.1 Introduction. In South Africa's legal framework, the doctrine of separation of powers is embedded implicitly in the 1996 Constitution, shaped by the historical experiences of apartheid and the necessity of creating a democratic state. The constitutional principle during the transition to democracy mandated a structured division of powers to uphold democratic values such as accountability and openness. 2.3.3.2 The legislature. The South African Constitution establishes a less strict separation of powers, allowing overlaps between the legislature and executive. Parliamentary members, including cabinet ministers, hold dual roles, which enables the executive to influence legislative processes. However, this arrangement is intended to enhance accountability and efficiency, as it facilitates communication and cooperation between legislative and executive branches. 2.3.3.3 The executive. The executive authority, vested in the President and the Cabinet, is responsible for implementing laws and policies. While the executive holds significant power, it is subject to parliamentary oversight. The Constitution mandates accountability, ensuring cabinet members report to Parliament and can be removed through a no-confidence vote or impeachment process. 2.3.3.4 The judiciary. Distinct from the other branches, the judiciary operates independently, tasked with interpreting laws and reviewing government actions. The Constitution grants the judiciary the power of judicial review, allowing courts to nullify laws or actions that violate constitutional norms. This independence is crucial for upholding justice and democratic principles. 2.3.3.5 The counter-majoritarian dilemma. Judicial review raises fundamental questions regarding democracy and representation. The counter-majoritarian dilemma addresses concerns about unelected judges overruling decisions made by the majority through democratically elected representatives. While judicial review is essential for defending rights, it often contradicts the idea of representative democracy, leading to debates about its legitimacy and implications for societal governance. The South African Constitution acknowledges this complexity, balancing the authority of the judiciary with the need to respect popular will while ensuring the protection of minority rights. Overall, the separation of powers in South Africa illustrates a unique adaptation that reflects the nation's history and aspirations for a democratic future, striving to find harmony between various government branches while addressing the implications of power distribution and accountability. Study notes on the rule of law. 2.4 The rule of law. The concept of the rule of law is fundamental in ensuring justice, equality, and governance under a legal framework. It outlines the relationship between the law, individuals, and government institutions and is pivotal in safeguarding rights and freedoms in the South African context. 2.4.1 Introduction. The rule of law is established as a foundational value in Section 1 of the Constitution of South Africa, 1996, indicating its significance in maintaining democracy and governance. This principle asserts that all individuals and authorities are subject to the law, ensuring accountability and preventing arbitrariness in governance. The scope and application of the rule of law are subjects of ongoing debate among constitutional scholars, emphasizing its dynamic interpretation. 2.4.2 A brief history of the rule of law. The historical understanding of the rule of law can be traced back to A.V. Dicey, who identified three core principles. 1. Supremacy of the law. Government actions must derive their authority from existing laws, preventing arbitrary rule. 2. Equality before the law. All individuals, regardless of status, must be treated equally and have access to the same legal protections. 3. Judicial oversight. Ordinary courts play a critical role in enforcing laws, which should protect the fundamental rights of individuals. During the apartheid era, the notion of the rule of law was distorted. Although the apartheid regime claimed to govern under laws, these laws were often unjust and served to enforce systematic discrimination. Laws enacted by the regime were tailored to enforce racial segregation and oppression rather than protect citizens' rights. 2.4.3 The rule of law under the 1996 Constitution. The 1996 Constitution signifies a pivot from the oppressive legal framework of apartheid toward one that emphasizes dignity, freedom, and equality. It mandates that all laws and governmental conduct must comply with constitutional norms, effectively invalidating any law that conflicts with the Constitution. Judicial review is a critical component of this system, empowering courts to challenge governmental actions and ensure compliance with constitutional mandates. The Constitution reinforces the independence of the judiciary, positioning it as a key arbiter in upholding the rule of law and protecting individual rights. This legal framework stimulates the transformation of South African society by embedding values of human dignity and equality into the legal system, thus ensuring that laws serve the people rather than the state apparatus. Summary. The rule of law is foundational to both the governance and legal systems in South Africa. Established in the Constitution, it emphasizes that laws operate equally for all citizens, protecting them from government overreach. Its evolution from a distorted interpretation during apartheid to a robust system that now includes judicial oversight highlights its central role in democracy and individual rights within the contemporary legal landscape. These notes encapsulate the journey of the rule of law and its critical importance in maintaining a fair and just society in South Africa. Study notes on democracy. 2.5 Democracy. The concept of democracy is essential for understanding governance structures and citizen participation in political processes. This section explains multiple dimensions of democracy as represented in South Africa's constitutional framework. 2.5.1 Introduction. Democracy encompasses the principles, values, and practices that allow the populace to participate in governance and decision-making processes. It aims for accountability, representation, and respect for the rule of law, all foundational to South African constitutionalism. 2.5.2 Conceptions of democracy. Democracy is multidimensional, and several concepts exist within its framework. Direct democracy. Citizens have the right to directly participate in decision-making processes, often through referendums or initiatives. In this model, the populace votes on policies or laws rather than electing representatives to make those decisions. Representative democracy. This common model involves citizens electing representatives who make political decisions on their behalf. In South Africa, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces embody this form, where elected officials are accountable to their constituents. Participatory democracy emphasizes active citizen engagement beyond just voting. It encourages public involvement in policymaking, fostering greater direct interaction between citizens and the government. Constitutional democracy combines democratic governance with the constitution that governs the operation of democracy. In South Africa, the 1996 Constitution serves to establish rights and limits on the power of various branches, ensuring rule of law and equity for all citizens. 2.5.3 Direct democracy. Direct democracy allows for immediate citizen participation in legislative processes. While it enhances civic engagement and ensures that laws reflect the people's will, it faces challenges, such as the need for informed decision-making and the possibility of majority tyranny over minorities. 2.5.4 Representative democracy. In representative democracy, elected officials act on behalf of their constituents. South African democracy, characterized by regular elections and multi-party systems, aims at ensuring that representatives make decisions reflective of the electorate's interests and preferences. 2.5.5 Participatory democracy. This approach goes beyond the electoral process, promoting ongoing civil involvement in governance. Engaging citizens actively allows for nuanced discourse on issues rather than relegating political engagement to election seasons alone, fostering a more informed citizenry. 2.5.6 Constitutional democracy. Constitutional democracy incorporates democratic principles within the framework of a constitution designed to protect fundamental rights. The South African Constitution necessitates that all governance actions align with constitutional mandates, thereby safeguarding democracy and individual rights. Summary. Democracy in South Africa is defined by a mosaic of participatory practices that include direct, representative, and participatory elements, all underpinned by constitutional principles. The 1996 Constitution artfully intertwines these forms of democracy to ensure a responsive, Accountable government that is rooted in equality and the rule of law, emphasizing the importance of protecting minority rights amidst the democratic process.